our family watched, what is it, 13 Days? The Cuban
Oh,
Missile Crisis
about the Cuban Missile Crisis in
dramatization.
1962, three, two.
Uh, it's got to be two, I
It must be
think.
two. Yeah.
But in any case, really well done. High production values. They go to a lot of effort to represent the scenes and the people in ways, doesn't look like JFK exactly, but close enough. And anyway, but, so I went and I looked it up. How accurate was this portrayal?
Mm-hmm.
And highly accurate in terms of narrative of the progression of the missile crisis, not highly accurate with respect to the personalities involved. In fact, the main character is actually kind of a nobody in the White House.
Really?
Yeah. So
the main character in the film is brought up to tell the story, but actually wasn't particularly anything.
As far as anybody knows, he is
Okay.
not an important player, and he was, or not nearly so important a player, and he is used as a narrative device to make the story work.
He gets told things. He introduces ideas that otherwise you'd have to put script on screen or something.
Right, and he drives, the Kennedys to find the best in themselves and to stand up when they have to, and these things. And anyway, how much does the representation, because this is not a fictionalization of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because it accurately represents something that, you and I didn't live through. We're not old enough to have lived through it, much less lived through it at an old enough age to grok it in real time. So the representation of the Cuban Missile Crisis that we see on screen comes to supplant the actual history for a large number
of people. What do you mean
people.
it's not a fictionalization? It is. It's fiction. It's portrayed as historical fiction, which historical fiction is a broad genre in which I think you hope for the ability to learn some truth about history, but any particular thing that you take from historical fiction, you would want to fact check that
Of course.
before assuming that it was actually something that was being conveyed accurately.
But I can see that you, like I, were surprised that the main character in the film is not an important player in the Kennedy White House.
Right. But I guess I was just objecting to of course it's a fictionalization.
Well, but I guess the point is then fiction is such a huge category from, the dialogue is made up, but the events are accurate, to this person is actually not really, is playing a role that was not played, but is necessary to get the story told in 2 hours.
Right. That's a whole other conversation, right? Like what in a police procedural or something, like what's a dramatization?
Yeah.
A dramatization is, as far as we are led to believe, supposed to be an actual, accurate portrayal of what happened, but of course no one knows for sure exactly what all happened, and this particular dramatization may inherently value the perceptions and the hypotheses of the person who put that together at the time, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong.
Well, and so this goes back to my point about textbooks and things like this. The degree of damage done to our historical understanding by the movie 13 Days is very tiny. In fact, probably it is a vast upgrade in terms of the fraction of the population that understands what the events were and all of that. The damage done by something that, inverts a story, right? That makes, the Allies, makes the U.S. the hero of the Allies rather than acknowledging the huge amount of the winning of World War II that was done by the Russians, for example, is, destructive of our understanding of history. And the basic underlying point is truth-seeking is about truth-seeking. We don't get to tell stories that increase our valor at the expense of truth, because the point is the truth-seeking is like a sacred, or should be sacred, meaning we should not mess with it.
To that point, we have several more examples of exactly this from Thomas Sowell. From, again, Intellectuals and Society. Homelessness, he writes, is another area where much of the media filters what kind of reality gets through to their audience. During his time at CBS News, Bernard Goldberg noticed the difference between what he saw on the street and what was being broadcast on television. He said, "In the 1980s, I started noticing that the homeless people we showed on the news didn't look very much like the homeless people I was tripping over on the sidewalk. The ones on the sidewalk, by and large, were winos or drug addicts or schizophrenics. They mumbled crazy things or gave you the evil eye when they put paper coffee cups in your face and asked for money. But the ones we liked to show on television were different. They looked as if they came from your neighborhood and mine. They looked like us. And the message from TV news was they didn't just look like us, they were like us. On NBC, Tom Brokaw said that the homeless are, quote, people you know. If the homeless tend to be sanitized in television news, businessmen tend to be demonized in movies and television dramas, as another study found. Quote, only 37% of the fictional entrepreneurs played positive roles, and the proportion of bad guy businessmen was almost double that of all other occupations. What's more, they were really nasty, committing 40% of the murders and 44% of the vice crimes. Only 8% of primetime criminals were black. End quote. But continuing with what Soul writes, Soul, yes. In real life, as well as in fiction, what was presented to television audiences was highly atypical of what existed in the real world. Another example. During the period studied, 6% of the people with AIDS shown on the evening news were gay men, but in real life, 58% were gay men. On TV, 16% were blacks and Hispanics, but in real life, 46% were black or Hispanic. On TV, 2% of the AIDS sufferers were IV drug users. In real life, 23% were. This creation of a picture reflecting the vision of the Anointed, rather than the realities of the world, extends to textbooks used in schools. Publishers such as McGraw-Hill, for example, have percentage guidelines as to how many of the people shown in photographs in their textbooks have to be black, white, Hispanic, and disabled. Moreover, the way these individuals are portrayed must also reflect the vision of the Anointed. According to the Wall Street Journal, quote, one major publisher vetoed a photo of a barefoot child in an African village on the grounds that the lack of footwear reinforced the stereotype of poverty on that continent, end quote. In short, the painfully blatant reality of desperate poverty in much of Africa is waved aside as a stereotype because it does not fit the vision to be portrayed, even if it does fit the facts.
Wow.
That's the second of the 4 excerpts I wanted to share from Thomas Sowell's Intellectuals in Society.
So I want to point to 2 things. One, Michael Schellenberger did a tremendous amount in much more recent times to reveal the factual bankruptcy of the idea that what we have is a homelessness crisis, right? Homelessness is a symptom of a different crisis, and it is a euphemism that obscures the problem, so that lots of people labor under the misapprehension that the problem is not enough homes and rent being too expensive or something like that. Rather than,
we talked about this. I mean, his book is extraordinary, and we talked about this in some live streams past.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
he also did the service, as many people now are doing, but he also did the service of just taking the camera onto the streets in the Bay Area, specifically in San Francisco, and saying, yep, this is what I'm seeing. This is what is happening.
And he interviewed people, and it was amazing how open they were about their drug addictions and what kind of hospitable environment they find for their vices in San Francisco.
Yes. I actually just anecdotally, and I'm not going to give away the specifics so that I'm just going to anonymize the person I heard this from, but I was just talking to someone in Portland who said there's an interview up with some homeless woman who was being asked, like, why don't you go into the housing that's been erected? Like, there is actually some housing that has been put together, but there are a few rules, like, there's no drugs, and and you have to keep the space clean. And she said, why would I leave? This is fantastic. You get up, you get high, you go get your free meal, you come back, you go to sleep, you get up, you get high, you get your free meal, you come back, you go to sleep. Repeat. And no, that's not everyone's story, but her story, and it's very much like what Schellenberger was seeing farther south on the West Coast in another major city, was, if you make a life appealing to people who have underlying problems that are not entirely reducible to, I do not have a home, then they will continue to choose to live the life that you have made appealing.
Yeah. People navigate based on proxies for well-being. And unfortunately, those proxies are especially easily sidelined by chemicals that interfere with the motivational architecture. So it's not surprising that if you take the pain out of losing your home and you facilitate the pursuit of those chemicals, that lots of people will fail to find the motivation to fix their lives. And I am not claiming that there is a solution in that description. What I'm claiming is that it is obvious that you will increase the problem if that's your approach, is to use compassion in a naive way is of course going to create a bigger problem than you initially had.